Hi, friends. My name is Edie Penn, and welcome to my new podcast, PostScript. This podcast is about the scripts we inherit, the social contracts we internalize, and unspoken rules we live by, sometimes consciously, sometimes without realizing it, and how those things shape what we believe, what we tolerate, and how we move through the arenas of our lives. I'm coming to this conversation as someone who's spent over 20 years in human resources. And while so much of what I've learned about these scripts and social constructs that we're slaves to is through that work, I know for sure that it applies to you as a regular everyday person in your regular everyday life. I've seen how breaking down these constructs has freed people. In many ways, what I've learned is that some of these normal ideas that we repeat at work and in our relationships, at leadership conferences, as parents, walking through our everyday lives, are actually really harmful scripts in disguise. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. One of the most harmful things about some of these frameworks is that they're presented like truth, not a perspective, not this might work for you if, truth. And the harm of that is it doesn't even acknowledge that the assumption that this works for everyone is sometimes the very problem. Because if it doesn't apply to you, if you do all the things and your life doesn't suddenly improve, you start thinking that the problem is you, not the framework, not the message, not the messenger, you. You start thinking that you're undisciplined. Maybe you're too broken or too sensitive. Maybe you're too resilient or not resilient enough, this or that, whatever, fill in the blank. When really, the framework was never built with you in mind. It was built for somebody with a different set of permissions, a different kind of body, a different relationship to relationships, to risk, to danger, to authority. And when you try to force those things onto your life, you end up worse than you were before. That's not self-help, friends. That's self-destruction. So the goal of this podcast and how I want you to engage with it is not take what I say as gospel. God, that's the opposite of what I want you to do. It's to practice discernment. I want you to listen and ask yourself, does this idea make me feel more free or more restrained? Does it expand my thinking or shrink my options? Does it help me feel more like myself, or does it make me feel like I need to become someone else to be good or good enough? I also want you to pay attention to the voice behind that message. Whose perspective is that? What assumptions are they making about your life, your body or relationships, resources, safety, access, or your reality? Does it even make sense to you? To be clear, this isn't about me. It's why this podcast will be audio only. Don't get it twisted though. I have a voice for radio and a face for TV. I just don't want you to become an Edie Penn fan. I mean, you can because I'm fabulous. But the point is not worship. The point is practice. The point is that you get better at thinking for yourself so that you can take what's useful and leave the rest and build something that actually fits your life in community, and not just what sounds good, what's trending, what's on the New York Times bestseller list, what's packaged well, or the latest thing you saw on your IG feed. What's true, what's aligned, and what's for you. Enjoy the episode. Hi, friends. Thank you so much for everyone who joined in to listen to the first episode on Valentine's Day. Your support and encouragement is much appreciated. While this podcast is about scripts, we've explored a very specific one for the purposes of Valentine's Day because the scripts related to it are pretty clear and an easy entry point to the topic. I plan to do another 8 episodes over the course of the year and decided that this one should be slightly interactive so that you can understand in a more fundamental way how scripts show up in your own thinking. So I was scrolling the interwebs, as one does, and came across a video of people calling into a show to discuss a dispute. Having formerly worked in radio and understanding the nature of social media, I understand that these sometimes are bits or are scripted. But this one serves today's purpose. I'll put a link to the IG video in the description, but also give an overview as well. So, 2 people call into the station, a husband and a wife. The wife starts by saying, I want you to apologize for sending me a Venmo request for half of my 30th birthday trip. We're married. That's weird. The husband chimes in and says, she told you she makes more money than me, right? The wife responds by saying, this is not about money. The radio host says, no, she didn't tell us that, but does that make a difference? The wife chimes in and says, no, it doesn't. This is a surprise for me. This is about making me feel special. The radio host jumps in and says, well, she told us that she wanted a surprise trip for her birthday, that she told you that, and that you go on this awesome weekend and then hit her with a Venmo request for her half when you get back. He says he knows that the couple agreed to split their finances 50-50. The husband chimes in and says, well, before we got married, we agreed to that everything would be 50-50. And it was important to him because he didn't want money to be a weird power thing in the relationship. She says, it's not on your birthday. He continues, she asked for a weekend away. I planned it. I researched it. I booked everything, but it's our money now. And if I paid for the whole thing, that's not really 50-50. If we start bending the agreement for birthdays, where does that stop? There would be resentment over money later when we said 50-50. The wife responds by saying, I just didn't want to feel like you sent me an invoice for turning 30. Okay, that's it. That's the full clip. That's all the facts that were given. You've watched the video or you've heard my reproduction of it here. I want you to pause and think through your reaction. Jot down a few notes or just note it mentally to yourself. Are you done? Okay. As you can imagine, or went and read for yourself, the comments are full of people saying things like, your husband hates you. He wants a business partner, not a wife. He's resentful that she makes more money, so she should send him a Venmo request for all the gifts that she's bought. And the old standby, he'll be saying the divorce came out of nowhere. Are any of those your reactions too? Let me tell you what my immediate reaction was. There's not enough information. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Edie, darling, you're treating this like a lawyer. And you know what? Maybe you're right. I'll accept that accusation. What's the saying? Lawyers go to law school. Law schools don't make lawyers. So yeah, my brain has always worked this way. I'm very intentional about not filling in facts. It is this fact about me that created the space for me to start really paying attention to scripts in the first place. Scripts often act as fact fillers, frameworks that we come back to again and again to make sense of the world. So in this situation, you and the audience start to assume things like, because it was a gift, he should have paid for the whole thing. Or if he paid for the whole thing, he must have been able to afford it. Or the Venmo request came out of nowhere. Or the couple usually pays individually for gifts. But friends, none of those facts were actually given. Those fillers are created either from your own expectations in your own relationships or standard scripts that we just apply to everything. For example, people shouldn't pay for their own gifts. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but the problem here is we don't actually know a key thing. Does their agreement to go 50-50 extend to gifts? We don't know this. We might have some insight, perhaps, given that the husband says, if we start bending the agreement for birthdays, where does that stop? He didn't say for gifts. He said birthdays. If the agreement did extend to gifts, does that change your reaction to the situation? Next, if he paid for the whole trip, he must have been able to afford it. We don't know this either. Maybe he worked extra shifts or didn't pay some bills or push some other things, all the things that we do to scrounge money so that we can do that thing. And in this case, give her the thing that she asked for. Or maybe the whole time he was working under the terms of their agreement to go 50-50 and so spent twice as much as he otherwise would have to make it extra special for her. By the way, I can see your face. The face you're making, I see it. The doubts you're mumbling under your breath, I hear that. But guys, this is an exercise, friends, and I chose a spicy one for this reason. Scripts are stealthy. Sometimes they operate as long-held beliefs or traditions that we've never interrogated, and so to question them feels weird or stupid or pointless. I hear you saying, Edie, I'm not going to question every single action I take, and I'm not asking you to. That's fair. All I am asking is that when you can, when presented with information in any form, from any source, that you critically think through what is being told to you, as I imagine you're doing right now. This sounds foreign to you, so you're willing to challenge it. But what happens when you're being fed something that sounds good or familiar or just makes sense? Do you interrogate those things in the same way? Why not? Well, I have some thoughts. Humans rely on a set of cognitive shortcuts to quickly judge whether someone or something is credible. These evolved because we usually don't have time or information to fully verify claims. So the brain uses signals that tend to correlate with credibility or other things, even though they can be misleading. These things have mostly evolved from biological survival instincts. So let's start with familiarity. Something familiar is statistically more likely to be safer. For example, I've eaten this plant before and it didn't kill me. Or someone with authority who's confident. They must know what they're talking about. For example, they've seen this plant before, they've eaten the plant before, and nothing happened, allegedly. And then social proof. Moving with the group is safer for everyone. Everyone is eating the plant, so it must be safe. From these, some other cultural shortcuts have evolved. One is narrative coherence, which means if the story makes sense, it's probably true. Another is identity alignment, which means people like me are more trustworthy. But similarity doesn't guarantee accuracy, and a coherent story can still be wrong if key facts are missing, and scripts are fact fillers. Now listen, I don't want you guys to think I'm beating you up. Sometimes I still act out of scripts I don't realize I'm still holding. Quite a few years ago, I met an Asian woman. She was Chinese to be exact. I think that's important for the story. And she told me her name was Anna. When she introduced herself, I said, Anna is a nice name, but that's got to be your American name, right? What's your Chinese name? She cocked her head to the side and looked at me funny and said, Anna. Anna is my given name. I didn't push anymore because I can read a room, but I was confused why she wouldn't just give me her Chinese name. The gall. I was operating in good faith from a terrible script that Chinese people and other Asian people were always given two names, a traditional name and one that was more suitable to the American palate. And sure, that may be true for many people, but the presumption that it was true for everyone robbed me of a potential friendship before I could even make it. So I'm guilty too, but I'm never going to make that mistake again. So as this format will go, I've crafted a few questions I think you might have and provided my own answers. But remember, this is not about agreeing with me. This is about pausing and interrogating for yourself how scripts sneak into your thinking. So here's the first question. If scripts are everywhere, how do I know which ones are worth keeping? Friends, let's be clear. You can keep every single script you currently follow if you want. The point isn't to reject them. The point is to be conscious of them, to choose them. For example, maybe many of you believe, like I believe, that people shouldn't pay for their own gifts, and that's perfectly fine. The question I want to ask you is why? Of course, by definition, a gift is something freely given, right? But then why are there situations where we all agree that it's fine to pay for something that is a gift to you? What makes those situations different? What distinctions between the two matter? The question isn't which ones to keep. It's whether to know you're following one and why. Next question. Are scripts always harmful, or do we actually need some of them? Listen, I'm not saying that scripts are inherently harmful. They're shortcuts. And like I said earlier, our brain has developed these for good reasons, and some of them we need. I wouldn't ask you to negotiate every single social interaction from scratch, how to greet someone, how to show appreciation, how to celebrate milestones. Scripts make us efficient, but where they become harmful is when we follow them automatically without ever interrogating them. A long-held tradition that no one has examined can quietly push people into situations that are unsafe for them, for the ones they love, or don't actually reflect their true core values. So sometimes the problem is the script itself, but sometimes the problem is that the script is invisible. Finally, why do scripts feel true even when they're not? We also talked about this earlier. Scripts feel true because they borrow the same shortcuts our brains use for survival. Things that are familiar feel safer. Things that many people believe feel credible. Stories that make sense feel accurate. So when a script is repeated enough by our families, our culture, the media, our friends, it starts to feel like truth instead of a perspective. And feeling true and being true are not the same thing. So friends, that's all the news that's fit to print for this episode. Thank you so much for listening and for joining me here. I'm so excited for you all to be on this journey with me, and another episode will be dropping next month. Be on the lookout for it. I love you. Have a great day.